2.7 is now 3.1.
I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, it just came out.
Yeah, I haven't heard that from anybody at the Fed. You're including the Martin renovation. You just added
our entire capital.
Yeah, you just added in a third building. Is what that is. That's a third building.
Well, no, but it's a building that's being built.
No, it was built 5 years ago. We finished Martin 5 years ago.
So it's part of the overall work.
But it's not new.
Well, those tensions between President Trump and Fed Chair Jerome Powell playing out in real time in front of the cameras yesterday during the president's visit to the Federal Reserve Building. Joining us right now is someone else who was at that meeting, the Office of Management and Budget Director Russ Vought. He was with the president yesterday. And Russ, thanks for being with us this morning. We saw how things played out on the cameras. How was it behind the scenes?
It was a very good visit. We learned a lot. The president learned a lot from being able to see it with his own eyes. He's a master builder. He has had great interest in this project. We learned a lot from watching him as a builder, figuring out the types of things that he would never have done in designing this as a renovation. And fundamentally, the reasons for why this is costing so much. They had good conversations throughout, and we're not surprised that they don't necessarily agree with every of the viewpoints that we have, but these are the numbers that have come from the Fed, and they are entirely correct. This renovation, the combination of all of the headquarter buildings, is a $3 billion, and the overrun just for those two buildings, we want to talk about just those two, in the Chairman Powell, the overrun just for those two buildings is $1 billion, and there's some unbelievable reasons for why that is so.
Such as?
Such as, number one, they are putting a tunnel in between the buildings. Number two, they're essentially excavating an entire basement approach in an area of the D.C. the National Mall that we know has problems with water. So you have to go very deep. You have to be able to figure out how you're going to prevent future leakage down the road. And they have a enormous parking lot that they are building into the ground that is something that most agencies don't have. For $30 million compared to the $250 million for the parking itself, you could be able to provide parking benefits for the entirety of the Fed. There's largesse everywhere you look, and there are some fundamental reasons for why this thing has become so big. This is not just restoring a building that needed to be restored for its historical purposes, nor is it the only renovation this building has received. That is inaccurate. This building had renovations at the turn of the century, 1999 or so. And so there's been a lot of work done to this building. This is about doing enormous renovations of an entire headquarter building and largely escaping the notice of the public and Congress.
Well, Russell, that's where I wanted to go with this, which is to say, and I'm all for shining a spotlight on things. Transparency is clearly important. The question that I have as a taxpayer and the criticism of the Fed in this context, if the criticism is valid, is whether you ultimately think or can specify that this wasn't done in a transparent way. Meaning, was this all some kind of secret that nobody knew? From my understanding, all of this was disclosed to Congress and to the government. It's obviously, we can see it physically happening if you walk by the building. So while it's important that the administration or others, say maybe there's a problem here, or not a problem, but there's cost overruns here, the question about sort of that this is terrible is what?
No, look, the information that we've ascertained, that Congress has ascertained, has become as a result of the oversight process. And we heard yesterday from Chairman Scott the extent to which it's been prying teeth to get this information from the Fed in a way that you would not have if you were trying to get Department of HUD to talk about their building campaign, which hasn't happened, is why they're having to move. And so as a result of that, we've had to rely on FOIA documents. This material hasn't been in their normal financial statements. This is something that has been at every step a huge labor to get information about what's going on, comparing apples to oranges with regard to being able to hide the extent to which those two buildings are overrun. The totality of this renovation project, begun a number of years ago, approved in 2021, is a $3.1 billion. it is the same levels of if you include all of the Palace of Versailles, if you include all of the congressional buildings from the dawn of this republic to now, this building equals that. That is what we are drawing attention to. And the other thing I would just say is the extent to which they continue to say, look, we've made these changes. They may have made some, but they're still relying on much of the same design. They talk about, oh, there's no private dining rooms. There are meal-ready meeting rooms. Meal-ready meeting rooms are private dining rooms for the executives of the Federal Reserve. And so that is the kind of things we're trying to get to the bottom of. The National Capital Planning Commission will be very involved in continuing to ask questions. But I think what you heard from the president yesterday is, like, we want to get this thing done. This is not an attempt to say this project should be halted permanently. We want to get it done, and we want to get it done as cheaply and efficiently as possible.
Right.
I think it gets to the degree to the fiscal mismanagement of the Fed.
Right, but Russell, part of what I think a lot of the public sees, and even the investor class thinks, is that this is a pretext to either try to fire the Fed chair or to pressure him effectively to lower rates, and that this is sort of a leverage point in a larger discussion and debate, or a way to distract from other issues that maybe the president's dealing with at the White House. So how do you see that?
You can only answer the question so many times, and the president has done that. He's asked repeatedly, do you intend to fire the Fed chairman? He said, no, it's not likely. I have no intention of doing that right now. And this is about ensuring that the Fed has the accountability of the American people knowing what's going on. Does the president have viewpoints? Yes, he does have viewpoints. The American people get to have a say in what they believe the Fed should do. The president believes that the American people, as the person that is elected on their entire behalf, get to have a say in whether rates are lower. And so if you're at the Fed and you're getting questions about both, of course you're going to answer to both of those issues. But it's also true that the Fed needs to be accountable for things that are beyond monetary policy. They're building their ability to transmit remittances back to the Treasury that impact our deficit, the extent to which their regulatory activities are supposed to go through a regulatory review process, of which they are not complying right now. So there's a whole host of issues with regard to the Fed, and we want to make sure that those questions get answered over time. This is not a pressure campaign on the Fed chairman.
Russ, let's just dig into that a little bit, because the general take from most people we've talked to is that yesterday, even though it was a little awkward in front of the cameras, was that there was some pressure that was coming down in terms of pressure on the Fed chairman. Is that what you think, too? We did hear from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who said on this program last week that he would like to see the Fed undertake its own internal investigation about, I guess, regulatory stray getting into other areas. Are these just pressure points to say the Fed needs to be looking at all of these things, or is this laying out for a reason for why Jay Powell would not be qualified to do that? The president said that he's not looking to do that, but are you and other people in the administration still thinking that he's not fit to be running this?
The president and the administration have policy views vis-a-vis the Fed on a host of different issues. You saw two of them discussed yesterday. The Secretary of Treasury has opined recently on a number of them. I just gave you a new one with regard to the regulatory review. And we're going to continue to articulate our policy concerns with regard to the Fed's management, and that will continue. You don't get to just be at the Fed and not have any criticism directed your way. That is not something that exists in the American political system. We respect the job that they have to do, that they are called to do under statute, and we're going to continue to represent the administration's perspective. The president will do it on his own behalf, and that is only going to continue in the next weeks and days ahead, because we see on a host of fronts a lot of mismanagement that is hurting the American people, and they need a voice in this town, and the president is providing that voice on ways that this Fed is holding the economy back from even greater heights.
Russ, do you anticipate that the Fed chairman will be there through his term in May?
again, the president's been very clear. He has no intention. He finds this conversation very unlikely. And so we are making a policy argument on lower rates. We're making a policy argument with regard to a extravagant, luxurious, costly renovation. And we will continue to make those policy arguments into the weeks ahead.
Steve Leisman was with us earlier this morning, and he posited that potentially what you'd see the Fed do in this next meeting is maybe change their language to say that if it looks like there's no inflation that comes from the tariffs, that could clear the path to lower rates. Would that be enough to satisfy this administration?
The president wants to see lower rates. We will be watching the next meeting very closely. We want to see the deliberations and the kinds of statements and hopefully decisions that get made to lower rates. I think he's heard that from the president yesterday. But this is something that we believe is vital over the next several weeks and months, is for the Fed to recognize what the rest of the country and honestly the world is assessing, which is America is hot right now. The economy has a chance to grow tremendously. We're already growing, and we've got to be able to have our federal rates reflect that so that we can get costs down.
But you do understand the argument that if the economy is doing so well, that's an argument to not lower rates.
Again, I understand the argument, but you don't want to have rates artificially high, and countries across the world are lowering their rates. There's no reason for why we should have artificially high rates and holding back investment in this country and the ability to have lending be cheaper. And that is something that we've got to address. We need a Fed that's willing to look at that carefully. And here's the thing. Part of it just comes from just this town's unwillingness to update their algorithms economically to the fact that tariffs are not leading to inflation like they predicted for decades and kept presidents from doing what President Trump has done, which is to impose tariffs, to protect the country economically, get businesses back on shore. And as a result, they're basically saying something that's going to happen, something's going to happen that hasn't, and they're holding back their fire. And as a result, that's hurting the country.
I mean, just to bring the perspective of a restaurant owner who was just on with us earlier this hour and a small business owner who joined us in the 6 a.m. hour, both of them said inflation is up. And in the case of the restaurant owner, he was talking about meat prices. He said wage inflation is starting to slow, and that's good news. But earlier this morning, we spoke to a small business owner who said everything he tries to do in terms of building costs, in terms of just running the business and the inputs he's putting into it, he has seen inflation. So if you talk to people on Main Street, they are worried about that inflation, and that is something that the Fed has to watch out for.
Well, certainly when you have a national debate that talks about costs being on the rise, when you don't see that in the numbers, what prices go up and will go down. But from a position of the overall inflation level, we're just not seeing that. And we don't expect that to change. We predicted this would not occur. It's not happening. And as a result, the president is being proven right economically. We had a lot of trade deals that are being passed. We're in a very good place on that front. And we're going to see ongoing success, but we've got to have lower rates. And I think that's what you saw the president put an emphasis on yesterday, and I expect that to continue.
Russ Vought, OMB Director. Russ, thank you for your time this morning.
Thanks, Becky.